Remember, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder, treason, and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot.
Too often, when I think of action or violence in movies, my mind jumps to blockbusters, like Avengers or Fast and Furious. And while, yes, there's plenty of action and violence, and they're straight out fun, the action and violence just seems very hollow to me. However, V for Vendetta opens in a dystopian future that's not too far from our own, where a government is corrupt to the bone and all information is censored, while the citizens are fattened and metaphorically neutered, all in order to slowly strip them of their individual freedom so that the collective government may gain more and more power while reigning supreme. Now, who might stand up to this corruption? Well, no other than our Cape protagonist V. And how might V fight against such a threat? Well, of course, with the power of cinema semiotics. What really cemented this film as important for me was its use of violence as more than just a simple ploy. Instead, through cinema semiotics, it has narratively intertwined the violence to carry the movie's ideology to the audience, as well as making remarks on the postmodern world we live in to this day. Now let's dig into the meat and potatoes of this cinematic masterpiece. The ideology of this film is not only what drove the story forward, but it's also what makes it so impactful to our modern era. But let's start with the former and how its ideology was beautifully wrapped in a bloody bag called violence. Our pre-mentioned protagonist V is living in a corrupt dystopian London, and his ideology boiled down to a single word is freedom. The notion that no man, government, or system can take away one's individual right to think and act for themselves. His ideology was never explained through exposition, so how did I come to know this undeniable truth of his ideology? Well, through cinema semiotics, of course. In cinema semiotics, we have our signifier and our signified. To truly understand V's ideals, we must understand the ideals of the government he hid from. This government had many signifiers that signified corruption and that they're just straight out evil. They would ban any music they deemed quote-unquote corruptive to the people. This signified censorship and control. They would capture and kill anyone who threatened their power, and more so, they would even abduct people that they deemed unclean, i.e. anyone not straight. This signified absolute power and terror. So even though no one told me hey, this government is evil, it was very clear through their actions that their ideals were not for their people, but for their own self-preservation. Now, let's take a look at V. Is he a morally perfect person, a knight in shining armor? I definitely say no. However, through his signifiers, we can conclude what he's trying to signify. He takes bloody violence to oppose this government by playing music that's been banned and destroying the justice courthouse, and even assassinating key members of the government to send a message that his ideals are in complete opposition to the government. Throughout the movie, V slowly stands up to the government more and more, and finally, the people slowly begin to wake up from their slumber and stand with him. He's no longer a man, but an ideal that is brought to life through the death of others. Another aspect of cinema semiotics is icons, physical objects that represent something other than themselves. The movie uses this splendidly with the Guy Fawkes masks, i.e. the mask V is always wearing. Throughout the film, we never see V's face or even find out his name. We simply know him by his mask. And very soon, this mask evolves into an icon of his very own ideals of freedom. And as we approach the end of the film, V sends out a mask to every citizen within London and asks them to stand with him on the 5th of November as he destroys the Parliament building and the ultimate sign of freedom. For it's not the destruction of the building that will bring about change, but the idea that these people can now stand on their own 2 feet and fight for freedom again. At the pinnacle of the climax, hundreds of thousands of unarmed civilians wearing the Guy Fawkes mask storm the government where thousands of soldiers wait for violence. It's the epitome of using cinema semiotics to tell a story where we have 2 opposing forces, and throughout the whole film, they are cultivated to have these 2 distinct icons that completely encapsulate the 2 sides' ideals. The people with the Guy Fawkes mask representing freedom, and the Parliament building representing absolute power and oppression. And in the end, V dies. However, his ideals are passed down to his countrymen, for he never was a man, but an ideal, and ideals can never die. Now let's take a look at how this same ideal of freedom that pushed our story forward is also more prevalent in our country than we care to admit. The movie definitely had heavy inspirations from postmodernism. The notion that the government exists and forces such hard and real truths on everyone, from their bigotry to their extreme religious views, it's social commentary on how we got to our own postmodernistic world. And while the movie does not finish with a super concrete ending, it still heavily implies that these people are moving more towards a postmodern world, one where their people are going to reject any ultimate truths or avoid anyone who has ultimate power because it would lead to another corrupt government. I think this reflects our own nation right now as we have a pandemic sweeping across our world. and as the nation and the government is taking more and more freedom for our quote-unquote safety. Now, this has nothing to do with my personal beliefs on politics, but has everything to do with a movie that is over a decade old, but still holds truth that if any person, government, or system tries to take absolute power or has absolute knowledge, it will lead to revolts, and ultimately, it would drive a stake in our nation and cause us to have a deeper sense of postmodernism. Because as a people, the more that we try and control things, the more that we will deteriorate from the inside out and cause more strife for us, causing more postmodernism and a bigger nihilistic view on life in general.
Beneath this mask, there is more than flesh. Beneath this mask, there is an idea, Mr. Creedy. And ideas are bulletproof.